just to get you familiar with the question box on the webinar. If you're hearing me good and you're seeing the title slide, go ahead and just let me know that in the question box. That'll let you get used to where it is, and also let me have some feedback that we're, again, transmitting good audio and video. And then we'll kick it in here. Again, throughout the webinar as we get started here, you're free to just light up the question box as it applies to the direct webinar. Charles, Peter, excellent. Joan, James, okay, we got a really big webinar today. Got a couple hundred people on here, so expecting a lot of good questions. Go ahead and use that question box as it applies to the webinar as I go through it. I'll try to answer those questions, as many as possible. And then at the very end, I'm going to open up Troy, who's the founder and CEO of NextWave Marketing Strategies and Age Lead Store. And we're going to have a little Q&A. We're going to get all those questions answered. And we're going to let Troy talk a little bit about Age Lead Store and NextWave Strategies and what he's doing there. And then ultimately, again, try to make sure that we get all of your questions answered. So, all right, with that, I think we have good transmission. So I'm going to actually switch off my video, and then we're going to go to the slides and kind of spend some time there. And then, like I said, I'll bring Troy on at the end, and we'll do as much question and answers as we can get accomplished. And then we are, again, just to answer the question that we'll get a million times before this is over, it is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording. You will get a copy of the slides. And if you stay to the end, you also get a copy of some extra bonuses that should help you in your sales process. So with that, I'm going to switch off my video, and we're going to focus on the slides. So again, thanks everybody for coming and participating live. And because you are here live, you're going to get to ask all of the questions, and we're going to try to get through all those things. And then at the end, I'm also going to provide you an email. So if for whatever reason you're watching the recording and you didn't get to make it to us live, again, you can email us and we'll answer all of those questions. So what we're talking about today is leveraging age leads in your sales process. So all of you, obviously, the vast majority of our audience are insurance agents and brokers. So you have a sales process. You're doing some sales activity now. You may or may not be using age leads in that process. So I want to give you a little bit of education on age leads. Maybe even if you're using them, you don't understand them as well as you should. There's lots of myths and misperceptions out there in the market about age leads. We have some people not seeing the slides. How about now? Are we seeing the slides? Thanks, Dave. Thanks for giving me that heads up. All right, everybody should be seeing slides now and hearing my voice. Thanks, Trish. I appreciate that. Okay, so again, there's some misperceptions about age leads. We're going to kind of go through those and hopefully clear up some of that, and then specifically give you my suggested system and sales process that we've kind of here at NextWave, we've just learned from how people are using the data that we provide and that sort of thing to give you what we think is the best practice and that we know is being kind of producing the best results. So let's get started. So here's our quick agenda. I've kind of gone over this a little bit. We're going to talk about what age leads are. We're going to talk specifically about cost and ROI and how it sort of lands you against the competition. There's a lot of competitive advantage age leads can bring you. And then we're going to go in a lot of detail on the system itself. Again, the best practices system, a combination of CRMs, dialers, designing those. We'll talk a little bit about buying leads at the end, but we're not going to focus as much on that. We want to really give you the system. We can talk about buying leads and that sort of thing on subsequent webinars, but right now we want to talk about the system and get production happening for you. So what are age leads? So age leads, just by definition, are anything after sort of the first initial inquiry. So that can be a matter of hours or even a day or so to the sort of the more traditional concept of 30, 60, 90, and even older data. And we'll talk about that as we go through the system, sort of how to handle that the disparate date ranges and timelines. Ultimately, though, and this is really important to keep in mind, ultimately, these are all hand raisers. These are all people who have said, hey, I need help with my insurance. I have an inquiry or have a need, or I'm investigating potentially my situation. So they are interested in taking your call. A lot of times by the nature of sort of the marketplace and the way the web sort of works, a lot of these consumers have at some point in their experience been completely overwhelmed because they're hit in a wave, and then all of a sudden there's nothing. So you're going to have someone that was probably at some point overwhelmed, maybe even upset to some degree. However, there's been, depending on your time horizon and where you sort of find your sweet spot as far as using age leads, they're probably neglected and dissatisfied. They never made a decision, or their need was never met, or potentially their need has changed. So there's a lot of opportunity sort of in the natural flow of how real-time leads are handled, which is ultimately the source of most of this data. And then ultimately, even by the nature of your market, whether you're in insurance or mortgage or some other financial services, oftentimes time itself just changes the need and the characteristics of that lead. So again, more opportunity. So ultimately, all of this data is ripe prospects and ready to respond generally to a professional approach and a professional system, which we're going to talk about. So here's the basic economics of age leads. So just the dollars and cents of it, if I take $1,000 worth of spend and I spend it on real-time leads, or this is pretty consistent also with other types of lead generation sources. If I spend $1,000, I'm going to get a small number of prospects or leads, to use the term liberally. And then ultimately, just by the nature of the numbers, I'm going to get a small number of deals. So the sort of the financial situation of age leads and the way that the consumer data works and the economics of it, for $1,000, obviously I can get exponentially more opportunities and prospects. And then as a result of just simply the law of large numbers, I'm going to produce more deals. So you can see in the in-between, in the sales funnel, I have a slightly different sort of image there because it does take a system. The simple process of calling is not going to allow you to create the level of activity and the amount of activity, or just simply to cover all of the opportunities and the prospects with enough intensity to actually produce the deals. So even though we're getting a great value here, we definitely have to put a system in place to make sure that we're getting the same level of production out the back end, and we're going to talk about that. So this is kind of how the ROI math works itself. So ultimately, when a consumer comes into the process, so it comes in and makes an inquiry, generally less than 25% of those people are even ready to consider becoming a sale, right? So they're just doing an initial inquiry, they're shopping around, they're trying to figure out what their need is potentially. So they're usually just sort of researching in that phase. So very small percentage of the initial inquiries within that short period of time, within the first week or so, are actually ready to close in any sort of way. Only 2 to 5% of leads close in the first contact, so it takes this additional time in order to make them close anyway. However, all that said, in that initial time frame, not many of those are actually going to close anyway. Ultimately, of that entire data, of all those consumers that make the inquiry, 50% will eventually close. You just sort of got to give them the time. So inherently, you're starting to already build a case for where age data might actually be better than sort of paying the premium on that initial inquiry. And then ultimately, as we kind of do this math, about 45 to 48% of all consumers that come into the system, ultimately the sale itself will occur within what we define as age leads. So again, huge amount of opportunity. Here's another thing that sort of tilts the scales towards age leads. If you think about the process, this is what your competition, hopefully you guys aren't going to do this because obviously we're going to give you a better system, but this is what the competition is doing with those leads and potentially doing with some of this age data that we're talking about. So 48% of leads only get one phone call. And we already talked about only 2 to 5% will convert in that first call anyway. So a huge percentage of the leads are not getting what it takes to close. So another 25% only get 2, 12% get 3, and then ultimately 10% don't get, only about 10% will get more than 3 calls. And we already know statistically, there's tons of studies about this, and you can search the internet and find lots of information to sort of support this claim. But the average lead, the average inquiry doesn't actually close until the 5th to 7th contact or touch. So ultimately, again, 90% of all of this data isn't getting the attention that it needs in order to close in the first place. So your competition and their sales processes are giving you lots of opportunities. So ultimately, why is it that 90% of these don't get the attention they need to ultimately close? Well, all of us are in sales, so we all kind of know by nature the things that work against us from time to time. Ultimately, sales is just not as easy as it appears to create the type of activity that's required in order to actually produce a sale. It just takes a lot of work. You're putting a lot of work into the effort. And so again, just not as easy as it appears. There's only a few of those leads. Like I said, time changes a lot of things, and a lot of consumers are inquiring but not really ready. So a lot of those leads aren't even qualified. Ultimately, our own sales sort of tempo and an emotional state, cause burnouts from time to time. So just the natural cycle of our own sort of rhythms from time to time will allow us to sort of fall away and not give the activity that's necessary. A lot of organizations, whether they're small or even they're too large, there's really low levels of accountability or even discipline in the process. So ultimately, again, it's easy for a lot of leads to fall through the cracks. And then for the most part, a lot of people in the market just simply don't have a process or system at all. This is the other thing that kind of works to our advantage. This is the way, maybe even yourself, this is the way you think leads work. So a consumer or a whole bunch of consumers come into the market. And then our natural assumption is that the lion's share or the highest percentage of those people will actually turn into purchases or actually buy immediately within the first few weeks or maybe the first month. And so this is what the graph we think looks like. A bunch of people come in, a lot of them buy right off the bat, and very few of them buy over time. And then ultimately, again, this is real data, real actual information. So this is how it really works. So this little pink or magenta line here is actually how most of these, and this is what they call cohort analysis. So of all of the people that made an inquiry on a certain date, this is actually what the line looks like as far as how those people that came in on that single day actually ended up converting. So you see it's a very even distribution. So about the same number of people converted in the first month that converted in the second month, third month. So again, all of these people that came in on day one sort of evenly almost distribute their closing activity over the next 12 months. So this tells you you've got to have a system that works on these people in a consistent way over a long period of time. Again, most of the sort of natural sales instinct is to apply that pressure in the first month and then just sort of toss those leads aside. And what we're saying is not only is there opportunity in the age leads, but even with your real time or whatever your other sales leads, however they're being produced, again, this is the way the closing distribution is. So your system's got to cover sort of a consistent long period of time. So now let's get into the sales process itself. And again, I want to remind you guys, feel free to use that question session. There's probably going to be a lot of questions as we start getting into the sort of the system and the process, because you guys are obviously doing something today. And if you're doing obviously something different than this, definitely chime in there so we can cover it in the question and answer period. So I'm going to say this over and over again, but your sales system, your sales process should ultimately have some sort of system in place so that you're actually gathering that data and building your own database over time. So ultimately that means a system of dialers and or CRM that again is going to allow you to, number one, build your database, and then over time give it the intensity and the consistency and the frequency that's necessary to yield the revenue. So ultimately giving it that 5 to 7 touches. I've heard over and over again or seen a lot of systems that involve your email inbox and spreadsheets, and ultimately they just don't scale. For you guys to do the volume that your production or your sales quota demands, those sort of systems just don't give you the level of activity that you're going to need. So you're going to need that CRM or that dialer or a combination of both. This is kind of what I suggest. The actual system itself, leverage those systems to create the automation, and then ultimately the templating that's used in that system so that you can do these things over and over again with as little activity or as little effort as possible on your own end. So you want to be able to, again, talk to those 1,300 plus leads without having to do them incrementally one at a time. So again, we're going to get into the details here. So ultimately, as you're building this system, these are sort of the critical sales systems that overlap and intermingle into your kind of your final system. So there needs to be a call system, and we're talking about the telephone. So that's again your dialers and your CRMs, an email system, a nurturing system. Again, the nurturing system is what's going to allow you to apply activity and pressure over time. And then direct mail. A lot of people discount this, but our direct mail, if you look at your own mailbox, it's getting lighter and lighter. So a good piece of direct mail can help with this process run in parallel. And then ultimately a web presence itself. So again, a lot of people forget about this. If you're buying data, it doesn't take out the need for a web presence, because again, if you're applying activity over a long period of time and you've put your name and your brand in someone's brain through these activities, ultimately they'll probably come to the web looking for you. So you need to make sure that your web presence is in order and becomes a second sort of integrated part of that sales funnel. So here's the call system that we recommend. And again, we could talk about the individual pieces of technology. We're not selling any sort of technology, but we have lots of partners that we can recommend. But there's technology that's incorporated here, and that's part of the bonuses. We're going to give you some recommended technologies to implement these things. But right now, I just want to talk about the system itself. Charles, I think that answers your question a little bit. So ultimately, call system, and this is where I think it all starts. So you're acquiring aged data. So let's say a spreadsheet worth of consumer data. The first place that we always start is we feed that into our CRM or dialer that starts to build our core database and allows us to initially make a call. So I always advocate the initial contact to all of this age data should be a call. Even if it results in a voicemail or something like that, at least you get the opportunity to place your name and your company in their mindset so that it can allow you to kick off a long-term marketing program. So again, CRM or dialer allowing you to make lots of calls very quickly and establish your name and your brand in their mind. And then as a result of that first call, we start to sort of branch off into a lot of other different types of funnels. So obviously, if it's a disconnect or do not call, we're just going to discard that data. If you have a positive engagement, we're going to very quickly and immediately, even if we're going to continue to next steps and follow-up calls, we're going to place that into our email nurturing so that we're continuing to reinforce that. We know from experience, oftentimes, even if you have a really strong first call, you may start to lose contact in that follow-up call, that next step call. So we want to make sure that they're already starting to get our emails and that process is working in parallel. Ultimately, no contact. Sometimes people will put them into the email. I like to actually start to put that pressure of calls at least 2 or 3 more times before I put them into my email, because really the calls are giving me a sense, is there anything viable here? And if there's nothing viable or we're not getting any sort of callback activity, then there's really not a lot of use to put them into my email. It's just potentially you're putting a lot of junk into your email, your database that's maybe not viable at all. So if you're not being able to get that second or third call, you're not getting any responsiveness, then maybe it's not viable long term. But again, some people differ with me and go ahead and put them into their email as well. So this is the email system. Again, all of these are sort of running parallel, but I wanted to give you sort of an illustrative example so you can kind of see what it looks like conceptually. Again, you'll see, and I'm going to say this over and over again, age data goes first to my CRM and dialer, and I'm trying to make that phone call as my initial contact. Again, the whole intent there, my name and my brand etched into their mind so that the rest of my marketing activity potentially will generate activity and opportunity. Charles, we'll go back over any numbers that you want to go back over as we kind of go through this. So I know I'm going through it quickly so we can kind of get the base, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, and then we'll definitely answer JFK. We're going to answer a lot of our specific sort of age lead questions at the end as well when we bring Troy up on the line. So keep those questions coming. We'll make sure that we answer them all. Again, age leads go CRM dialer. We're trying to make that first call. We're trying to initiate our name and brand into the conversation. And then I kick off my email nurturing campaign. Again, you can do this either way. You can either do it with a positive engagement, or if you're just willing to put all these people in the email, as long as you made that first call, go ahead and start to try to make email contact with them. And you can use, again, email technology so that you're not having to do them one-off. Depending on how much data that you're working with, You may want to do them one-off via your CRM, but again, you can use a system of templates and automation and autoresponders to facilitate a lot of this. And that's really what you're trying to do, is create the most activity with the least amount of work. I'll reiterate here in the upper corner here, I never start with an initial email. You're just opening yourself up for spam complaints and canned spam violations, those sorts of things. So make that call. There's a lot of reasons where you do have reason to email them. Obviously, they've made an inquiry. You're trying to help them with that need. So you're generally pretty safe in emailing them. But again, to make that as viable as possible and to have less spam complaints, to have less sort of defensive buildup, make that call first and then follow up with the email and try to make it look as personal as possible, even though you're using automation. So when I talk about a nurturing system, we're now starting to talk about sort of extending that timeline so that we're actually able to put that pressure over an extended period of time. So again, age lead data goes into my CRM dialer. I'm going to make those calls, but I'm going to start to combine them with some other techniques. So my email, this is kind of what that nurturing looks like. It's a combination of calls, emails, and we're going to talk about direct mail here in a second. But I'm starting to set up sort of parallel layers of engagement. So I'm continuing to make the calls. I always think that's the most positive sort of way to make that engagement come alive. You're probably really comfortable with making calls. It's very much a nature of your business and probably what most of your sales process already looks like. So as you're putting this age data in, all you're doing is upping your volume and upping the opportunity for prospects. But I have an engaged strategy with my email or maybe my direct mail, where if I have an engaged contact, I'm going to up my tempo. So I'm going to communicate with them more frequently. Again, making that assumptive sort of case that, hey, we've talked, you want to talk with me, and so I want to make sure that I'm being responsive to you. So maybe it's a weekly tempo. If I have an unengaged contact or I've lost contact, again, we're not trying to make these people, we're looking for the kind of the long-term viewpoint. So I'm not trying to make these people mad. I don't want to put too much pressure if they become unengaged or unresponsive. If I just simply elongate that tempo a little bit, I keep a good experience going, and I potentially will engage them when that need sort of circles itself back around, or for whatever reason they become more comfortable, feel more trusting and credibility around my process. But again, be careful not to intensify. We're playing a long game here, not short results. And again, with aged leads, because you can have so many more at essentially the same price or a very affordable rate, you can afford to play for the long game and the long road. Direct mail, this is kind of how I do direct mail. Again, I think that direct mail is becoming more and more capable because it's becoming less a thing and less of a mechanism. So people are so focused on the web that, again, a nicely done piece of direct mail or something that is a slightest bit more personal, maybe you can have an assistant help you with this or whatever, can be powerfully effective. Again, if it's combined with age leads coming into your dialer and CRM, making that phone connection, even if it's just a voicemail, and then all of a sudden, again, they see your name and brand in a different channel and a different mechanism, can come alive. There's a couple reasons for this. One, it's just, again, that frequency and that consistency of them seeing your name and brand obviously builds some awareness. But the other thing is, sort of subconsciously, I think if you're using multiple channels, there's this sense that, again, you're spending money, you're more professional, you have the resources to kind of go after and meet their need in a stronger way than probably anybody else that's engaged them. So again, by layering these things up, you start to build sort of a more professional case for you as an agent. Then ultimately, this is kind of a combined view, but then I start to pull in the website. A lot of people forget like how important the website is to this whole process. So ultimately, those age leads are coming into your core sales database. It's usually CRM. You're making those dialer calls. You're making the follow-up call system work for you. You're putting them into the email nurturing and the autoresponder system. Maybe your direct mail is coming into effect. A lot of times, even though you're doing all of this activity, they will become disconnected. But they will remember, because you've done all this great activity, you've done all this great work, they'll remember your name or your company. So you really need to make sure that your website is capable as well, because what's going to happen when they say, hey, I need that thing, but they can't remember exactly who was reaching out to them, but they're like, oh, I remember Bill. And so they go and they do a search for Bill and my company name or whatever they heard. you need to make sure that they can find your website and they can find you, and that there's a secondary system, again, where you can take in a fresh inquiry and match that up with them. So if you get 2 inquiries and you get one to your personal brand and you've acquired them, you got a really great lead there. So make sure that your website's capable, again, of taking in a second inquiry. And then also, this is really critical. If you haven't looked at your website for a while, make sure that it's mobile responsive. More and more of these people are doing it on their phone. So when you look at your website on the phone, make sure that they could easily just press your phone number and give you a call. So make sure that that website not only can take that second inquiry, but it also looks nice on the smartphone. And the first thing at the very top should obviously be your phone number so you can get that call. So now we're going to talk about buying leads. And at this point, I'm going to open it up to Troy. I'm going to bring him on here just in a second, and we're going to talk a little bit more about age leads, the characteristics of it, a little bit about how his age data works, and then we're going to drill through a lot of these questions. So a couple administrative notes before we kind of open it up to Troy. At the end, Troy is going to give you a special offer. So if you mention this webinar, obviously you're going to get a discount against anything that you purchase from the Age Lead store. So Troy will talk about that a little bit. Also, for being on the webinar and kind of sticking through us through the whole time and being with us here live, we're going to deliver to you these special bonuses. So these links will come alive. We're going to include a lead nurturing checklist. So you'll get kind of a checklist of all the things that I've talked about here, some sample sales scripts that we've seen be productive for some of our clients, and then recommended tools. A lot of you probably have tools questions. I'm already seeing some of those. I got a whole list of the tools that are involved there. All right, so let me open up Troy's line. And Troy, are you there with us?
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Troy. All right, guys, I'm going to leave everybody on mute just because there's so many people on the line, but make sure that you get the questions. And as Troy's talking, I'm going to be kind of peeling through these questions and make sure that we get everything set up. All right, so Troy, why don't you, as I go through some of these questions, why don't you tell us a little bit about where does this age lead data that you have, like, what are some of the sources? What are some of the mechanisms? How does it sort of come to you? And then ultimately, again, sort of what's the benefit of that data from what you've experienced with clients?
Most of our age leads are internet-generated insurance quote requests that we get from real-time, that were originally real-time internet leads. Small percentage would be from telemarketed leads initially, but usually long-form internet-generated quote requests.
Okay. And of this data, we've got a couple of questions here from JFK. Obviously some of these are small agencies, maybe 1 to 10 sales reps or employees. Can you get down to the area code? How specific can you be with this data? Can you get into really small areas and specific areas?
Yes, in our self-service platform, you can filter by zip code, area code, city, county, state, radius within a zip code, SCF code, which is the first 3 digits of a zip code. So really, as far as geographic filtering, yeah, we pretty much provide it all.
So you mentioned the self-service. So you mentioned the self-service platform and the filtering. Can you? I'm not sure everybody's used your platform. Can you kind of tell us about? A lot of people have heard about sort of cherry picking the stuff that they need and getting the exact data that they can actually be effective on. Can you tell us a little bit about the self-service platform and how that works and maybe what filters are available?
Yes, at agedleadstore.com, we have the only site of its kind that allows agents to, filter our database by their filters such as geography, consumer age range, lead age range, and then get counts and order any they want online, and then retrieve the leads instantly in the orders area of the website. They'll be in a CSV format that'll open right up into Excel. So yeah, those leads are there 24/7, and it's set up so that our system knows what leads an agent has ordered, and we'll never send them the same lead again. And there's a lot of validation going on in the background to make sure those leads are as good as they can possibly be.
Can you talk a little bit, Troy, about, obviously that's important. Lead quality is always important. When you get into age data, obviously there's some time differential from the initial inquiry. Can you give us a little bit of insight into the validation that you do and the kind of the level of effort that you make to make sure that the information hasn't changed or you have the most accurate information possible? Again, considering that these have aged over time and people's life changes, but can you talk a little bit about that validation?
Yeah, and that's one of the main things that separates us from our competitors is we're not just forwarding files, we're not redating leads, you know, we're doing a lot of validation, you know, and a lot of our competitors do little or no validation, and so, you know, we'll remove any duplicates. We make sure the zip code and area code match the state. We'll make sure the phones have 10 digits. We validate whether they're cell phones or landlines. Any leads over 86 days old or more, we remove any phones on the federal do not call list. So we do a lot of things to make sure agents, you know, have the best chance of success.
Excellent. So we've got a couple of questions, probably from the sort of larger agencies. Charles has a question here about the age lead store. Is there possibilities to private label for an agency so that they could kind of go in and allow their agents to pull through a private label system? Is that something you've considered or is available?
Yeah, we get a lot of requests for that, but it's possible at some point. We have yet to do that. I guess we're just so busy on so many other technical projects involving, you know, always adding more leads and better validation and so many other things
Right.
around making age lead store a better experience that's a project that's just we haven't got to yet. But
Haven't
if you have
tackled.
an affiliate program where, you know, and you can always, you know, order leads through the store on behalf of your agents, your downline or
Right.
whatever, and mark them up if you wish, or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Charles, this is something we could follow up, you know, individually. Obviously, Troy's email's up here. We can kind of follow up. Next Wave does have some really large call centers and call center activities. So there's definitely mechanisms to source a very large sales force with a large volume of data if that's necessary. But through the self-service platform itself, like Troy said, I think that you spent a lot of time and effort in making sure that services as well and the highest quality as possible. So, but Charles, if you have additional questions, obviously you can throw them in here, or we can follow up via email. Sort of in a similar, possibly if I understand the question right. If not, James, you can reiterate the question. But so James has ordered in the past. Obviously, most of your data delivery is through spreadsheets. I think because that uploads better into most CRM and dialers. Again, something that we recommend being the first step. But it looks like he's trying to pass these out potentially on an individual basis to individual agents. So he's asking for it in a PDF. Is there the mechanism, or do you kind of have to do your own sort of data processing if you want to hand the leads out on an individual basis? Is there any sort of PDF mechanism?
I can convert the leads to one lead per page in Word. And there's also instructions in the FAQ on how an agent can do that himself too. And so, yeah, at times agents want me to do that for them.
Okay.
It's up a whole lot of paper, but yeah. But
everybody's system's a little bit different, everybody's needs, but and that's important. Obviously, Troy does a lot to sort of accommodate as many people as possible. Michael, just to reiterate, yes, you will get a copy of the recording, you will get a copy of the presentation, and you will get a copy of all of the bonuses, and you'll receive that via email. So yeah, everybody on the call, you're gonna get that information. That's your benefit for being here live. Scott, as far as going back a little bit to the sales system itself, when you're selling over the phone, are you selling? Are you setting appointments? It's really kind of depends on, again, the time frame that you're buying, or sort of how much time has gone between that initial inquiry, the type of products you're selling. Some products are very conducive, like auto for a quick sale. Some, like life insurance or whole or something like that, obviously take more consideration, and a lot of times setting appointments may be a better way. There's some of the agents that use the data that do nothing but acquire the data. They have a different team that sets appointments for licensed agents and that sort of thing. So again, depending on how that process works, obviously the data is the same. It's really sort of sorting out your best sales approach. But it really kind of depends on the structure of your agency and sort of how your sales force is set up. We know, I think Billy Williams, who's guested for us here before, has a mechanism of sort of setting appointments and then getting licensed agents. So you have a mixture of licensed and unlicensed. You have to do some different things. So here's a good one. I know you get this a lot, Troy. Will you replace bad phone numbers or sort of bad leads? How do you deal with sort of bad data in your system?
Yeah, we're definitely very flexible with returns. Yeah, and usually we can send out, put replacements in an agent's account within minutes of him sending us back any bad leads that they got. Because,
yep, so,
as hard as we try to get rid of the bad leads, a few always sneak in there somehow.
Yep.
And we're constantly refining our technology to, provide even better validation.
Yeah, so Larry, hopefully that answers your question. Troy does a lot of data validation, specifically on the phone number for obvious reasons, but just the nature of time between initial inquiry and potentially what time frame you're buying. Obviously, some of those phone numbers will change, and just it's the nature of it. But Troy's pretty liberal with that, so hopefully that helps you a little bit, Larry. How many times are the leads sold? Is there any sort of mechanism or understanding, or once you get into this age data range, is it just sort of the nature of people leaving the leads behind that gives you the advantage? Can you talk to that a little bit, Troy?
Yeah, then that depends a lot on the state, and yeah, I mean, usually age leads get delivered on average, right, up to three times. Mm-hmm. But some states, there's like 35 states that probably just go out like one time or 0 times,
right?
And then other ones that will go out more. And
yep.
Yeah, we try to keep it under control.
Yeah, and to that note, Carl, and this maybe helps a little bit, to some degree, the age leads sometimes give you an advantage over that, because a lot of the sort of high resale rate often happens in the real-time lead category of the market. So once you get into age leads, a lot of times, just the nature of the time frame, you'll be able to hit those individuals when they don't have a lot of resales. They're not getting a lot of calls. So even if they have been resold, multiple times, just the nature of the time will span out those inquiries. So you're less likely to be sort of head-to-head competing with multiple calls on any of the age lead range. So that's kind of, again, just statistically, like we went through that, the salespeople aren't following up on them, or the time is distributing the calls. So as you get sort of further and further away from that initial inquiry, you're less likely to be going to head-to-head, even if they are sold multiple times. So a lot of times in the age lead market, that's less of a factor, Carl. So Troy, I know this is another one that we talked about sort of pre-call because we knew it would come up. Can you talk a little bit about the 89-day-old and scrubbing against DNC? I'll open this just a little bit, Charles. Our suggestion is that those initial calls are just to conduct a review or to engage the client, not necessarily based on the initial inquiry, but just to engage them to review their insurance needs. So from that standpoint, it's less of a sort of a direct inquiry, especially as you get older. But Troy, can you talk a little bit about the 89 plus and what you do as far as DNC?
Yeah, any leads that after they become 86 days or more old in our system, we remove any phones on the federal do not call list, just as kind of a courtesy. Even though agents really should be scrubbing them on their own also, mm-hmm. Through their SAN number.
Okay. So Sherry has one. Obviously, this is something we should talk about, Troy. Sherry has a question. What types of insurance leads do you have available? And sort of, can you give a sense of, obviously this range is all over the place, but you can kind of give a sense of the price range and the sort of affordability of this age data?
Yeah, and you can see the whole volume pricing discount chart on agedleadstore.com, and kind of we have health insurance, auto insurance, life insurance, homeowner insurance, and I believe maybe starting in about 2 weeks we should have annuities also. Kind of the more you order and the older they get, the cheaper they get. And leads kind of range from 1 day old to 1,200 days old, and there's 6 different lead age buckets. 31 to 85 day probably being the most popular, and 86 to 365 day probably being the second most popular lead age bucket.
Okay. So here's a good question. Obviously, we talked a lot about dialers and CRM systems and that sort of thing. From your experience in talking to clients, people that are using dialers, what's sort of the level of volume generally that they're buying at any given time, such that the dialer becomes effective? So we know, there's anywhere from maybe 2 to 3% sort of rate of conversion, or it varies all over the place. But I guess the real question is, what is the quantity that you need to acquire in order for a dialer to sort of be effective and have enough leads in it to really give you the output?
Usually, my clients want to put at least 1,000 leads in a dialer. They figure it's like not worth doing unless it's at least 1,000. And then at times people want tens of thousands per week. So it kind of depends how many seats in their call center.
Okay. And then this is a good question. This sort of kind of goes to the source of the leads. I mean, as a general case, and you talked a little bit about how you're acquiring data and the type of data that's in here. Are you buying from other vendors, or are these actually in most cases, the original leads from the original sort of source of generation? How does that kind of break down?
Yeah, we would. It's kind of a mix. We get them at times from the original lead generator, from affiliates, from they're not from our own.
Directly.
We don't have our own forms, but we get them from the people that, in most cases, the people that generated them. At times it could be from some broker in the middle, but yeah, we prefer if we can get them from the original lead generator.
Yeah, and so I mean, generally, obviously, it's the sources of your leads are kind of part of the secret sauce, but you are acquiring them from major sort of name brands, and people would know the sources of these inquiries and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of credibility behind the lead itself, just because the source that's generating it and then this providing it to you has some credibility in the consumer market itself. True?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we got a question from Joe. It's a little bit of an iterative question on dialers itself, but any suggestions on predictive dialers? And when you're delivering spreadsheets, are they pretty easy to take the spreadsheets you give them and get them into most CRMs and predictive dialers and that sort of thing? So again, recommendations on predictive dialers. This is maybe a technology question, some particular brands that you hear your consumers or your clients using, and then ultimately, are the spreadsheets pretty adaptable to those systems?
Yeah, so our leads come in a CSV format, which is the format that most agents would find the most convenient to upload the leads into any of the CRMs or dialers out there. And a lot of my clients use dialers such as Ytel, Qualifier, Dial Your Leads, SalesDialers.com, Five9, Velocify, VT Dialer, so Mojo Dialer seem to be the ones that pop up.
Okay, and we're going to give you a list, Joe, of all the technologies that we kind of recommend. So there'll be some additional things in the follow up. A couple of questions, sort of on the nature of your relationship to these others. Some of our audience is talking about it as clearinghouse, so to speak. So you are obviously you're not generating the leads directly, but you are providing a very diverse clearinghouse of this consumer data. Is that pretty accurate as to what you're providing here? And actually, I think the platform is critical. And we'll just reiterate. Troy can reiterate this, but the platform actually gives you the ability to go in there where the actual sources of the leads, they're gonna source you whatever you said your filter was, and that's all you get. You don't get to actually pick through them like you do on Troy's platform. Is that accurate, Troy?
Yeah. The beauty is that we're aggregating so many of the leads across the entire universe, much more than anyone else does. We're putting them all under one roof so that you just kind of got one-stop shopping. Like if you go out and without us, and if you would have to go to, if you had to go to several different age lead providers, then you would get like widespread duplication among them all. And it would just, between that and just having to deal with several companies and deal with redating or not validated leads or all kind of other issues.
Yeah. I think the other really important thing to understand for the folks on the call is, and I don't know how familiar you are with sort of the lead generation market, but there's this sort of weird scenario where most of the sources of lead generation, particularly on the web, they are charging, and many of you probably bought these, they're charging a very high premium for that initial immediate inquiry, that live or real-time lead. And so to sell the age data alongside of that would essentially undermine that market significantly, because you can see if you look at the prices, there's a significant discount. It's kind of like a used car, right? Or kind of like a car sale. As soon as it goes off the lot, or as soon as time starts to elapse, the depreciation or the cost of that particular opportunity goes down significantly, although you've seen sort of, as I've done the math, that the value actually may be increasing, although you're getting a much more affordable rate. But the opportunity is that differential is so significant that people like NextWave have to be out there in order for them to get that data out and actually continue to monetize it. So because they've spent a significant amount of money to create the inquiry itself. And so that's why this market exists. That's why NextWave exists. Sort of a related question, and then Troy, you can kind of correct me if I mischaracterize this, but you obviously see nextwavemarketingstrategies.com on this slide, and you also see ageleadstore.com on this slide. So NextWave Marketing Strategy is the larger company that sort of incorporates all of this business. The Age Lead Store is the actual technology platform. So it's the ability for you to self-service. Obviously, NextWave Marketing Strategies can do more than just deliver insurance or mortgage leads. They can deliver a whole variety of consumer data in general. Age Lead Store is just that self-service platform. So Troy is the founder, CEO, and owner of both of those entities. But that's kind of the nature of the two independently and how they kind of work together. But the Age Lead Store is a self-service platform. It's a piece of technology. NextWave is the larger sort of company. Is that correct, Troy?
Yes, NextWave's been, involved in, focusing solely on the age lead space for 14 years now. And I guess 4 years ago, we added ageleadstore.com to kind of make things even more convenient for our clients. And that's been a great success, and I'm so glad we did that. And
definitely.
Yeah, so at this point, NextWave is kind of like the where we provide a lot of blogs, webinars, white papers, where we're constantly involved in educating agents more so that they can have the every best chance of success with our leads. We don't want to just dump leads on people and have them fail. So we want to really, constantly give them the best advice we can on what technologies will help them succeed, what techniques are working, what, all the latest and greatest as time goes on. And, as the years pass, it seems like the argument for age leads just keeps getting stronger and stronger, as prospecting technologies and marketing automation just gets better and better and better. You can more and more efficiently work larger and larger amounts of leads and data to where, it's just awesome what you can do, because real-time leads are too expensive to put, enough leads into one of these email drip systems or lead nurturing systems or
Right, and that's important.
dialer?
That's important. Like the whole sales process, just inherently is a long game, and like Troy said, you just can't in an affordable way unless you're just huge acquire enough data to play the long game. Without incorporating this as at least a component of your sales process. So we've only got about 10 more minutes. So if you have any questions, fire them in. And make sure that we try to get to as many as we can. I'm going to try to cull through the rest of these really quickly. Also, just a note, it looks like Sherry and Daniel, you have your hand up. We just have too many people on the call to open the phone line. So make sure if you have any questions, if that was because of a question, that you throw it down in the question box. If for whatever reason the question box is not working for you, you can email Troy and we can get those answered directly. So let me get through some of these last questions here as quickly as possible. So what company will email third-party purchase leads? So this is a great question, Larry. So you notice in all of the systems that we showed today, we really focused on starting with the CRM or the dialer. So there's two reasons for that. One, you're initiating it with a phone call. So hopefully inherently you're starting to, again, even if it's just a voicemail or a message that you're leaving, trying to ingrain your name and your company and hopefully a positive experience and a positive first message before you ever touch them with email. There are systems that will allow you to email these without a lot of risk. So most of your CRM systems, for instance, you can set up autoresponders and you can set up templates that will make it very efficiently for you to either, as you're working the lead, manually push out those leads because they're all templated, or you can actually kick off an autoresponder. Salesforce will let you do this. Zoho CRM, a lot of your CRM systems will let you automate that process of applying that email pressure at the same time. Even the third-party systems like the MailChimp and some others that we recommend, again, if you're putting phone contact first, generally you won't get the complaints. Ultimately, none of the email service providers want you to make your initial contact with email, so you do have to be careful. There's some other systems like CAS tools, and we can provide some other names. If you email Troy, we can provide some other folks that will help you kind of condition that list, make sure that it's verified. We usually use Bright Verify to make sure all of the data is good before you make that initial email. But again, if you're applying a lot of phone pressure first, and again, putting your awareness into that phone contact, by the time you send the email, almost any platform will be okay because, again, you're not going to get the spam complaints. That's really what kicks you out of these systems is the high level of spam complaints. So there's a lot of sort of things, more advanced things, Larry, that you can kind of do to make that more effective. But most of it is apply the phone pressure first. Best CRM companies, I mentioned a couple. Obviously, Salesforce. Why don't I open it to you, Troy? You're probably a little more familiar with the types of CRMs that your clients are using. Can you give us some indication for the folks that have that question?
Yeah, Velocify, Inside Sales, Salesforce, and then a lot of them have kind of their own. State Farm as Prospector Plus, I guess.
Okay. Andrew, joining late. We had a few people pop on at the end. There will be a recording that goes out. So you're going to get a recording. You're going to get the presentation itself. You're going to get some bonuses. That'll all come out via email. So just to reiterate, everybody that's on the call, you're going to get the full recording, including the Q&A. So you get a complete package here afterwards. I had another question on lead cost. Troy went over, we're going to kind of run out of time here. Michelle, Troy went over the cost a little bit, but probably the best way for anybody that has questions about the cost of the leads is to go to ageleadstore.com, which you should see up on your screen. That's the actual self-service marketplace, and you can literally filter by the leads that you know that you can service. You can put that filter in there, and then you can get pricing back from that in real time. Troy, did you have a follow-up on that?
Yeah, that's definitely the best way. We just display all our pricing right there. So, yeah.
Okay. So Ernesto, we kind of covered this a little bit, but as to the number of times that a particular lead has been out in the market, Just by the very nature of the age lead process itself, and because time has elapsed, most of the reselling activity, or more importantly, the competitive pressure that that individual consumer is feeling happens at the very early stages of the inquiry. So as you buy data that's older and older, potentially there's less competition for that lead. Even if that particular piece of data or that particular consumer has been in the market, and this is just the nature of consumers themselves, they may have entered the market multiple times and as a result get multiple calls. But again, the older that data is, the less likely that you'll be going head to head with any sort of competition. So regardless of how many times the consumer has put themselves into the market and potentially the number of times that any lead source will have sold that lead over time, just because of the nature of time and statistics, you're going to be less and less likely to move up against a competitor. So really, the times that the consumer has entered the market or potentially been sold in the market becomes less and less of a factor. So hopefully that kind of helps you evaluate this channel or any channel for that matter. Is it considered an opt-in email? Obviously, the data itself, they're not opting in for your list necessarily. So again, it becomes super, super critical to approach this lead as a review of their insurance need. The advantage to you is you know that they're in the market or they have been in the market at some particular time. So they're a qualified prospect. But the way you approach them, if you approach them more as a new review or a new inquiry, and then condition them to sort of opt in or be familiar with your marketing, the more and more effective you'll be. Obviously, they're not opting into you specifically, so you need to build that relationship with your sales process. That's why we're talking about these kind of systems. Did you cover 250? I think this is a pricing question from James. Again, James, we mentioned the best way to figure out pricing, because it varies by time frame and by the characteristics of the lead and the type of product and that sort of thing, is to go to ageleadstore.com, which you'll see on your screen. You can filter specifically for the amount and the type of leads, and you can get direct, immediate pricing. And then if you're interested, you can buy it immediately and be able to work those leads. So that's the best way to figure that out. Question about Medicare leads. Troy, do you service Medicare leads?
We don't have internet-generated leads of people that specifically requested Medicare supplements, but you can filter our health insurance leads or other leads by those 65 and above. That may work for you.
Okay. All right. It looks like, hopefully I didn't miss anybody. It looks like we moved through most of the questions. Again, if you have any additional questions, you can email us, or you can call us. All of the contact information is up here. You can get a hold of Troy directly. He's very responsive to any queries that you make. As far as pricing and directly acquiring the data, ageleadstore.com is the best place to go and filter and look for the leads and the quantity that you can service. On that's the technology platform, the self-service. If you're interested in education, upcoming webinars, and those sorts of things, look at nextwavemarketingstrategy.com. There's tons of sales education and sort of how to do these systems. And then ultimately, because you've attended, we'll let you know on upcoming webinars, because we're going to do this, and we do this on a regular basis. So hopefully you'll join us on the next one. With that, I'm going to be very respectful of your time, and we are right at the hour mark. So we're going to go ahead and close down this. And again, you'll get the recording and all of the material tomorrow. So look for that email so that you'll get all the follow-up material. Thanks so much for joining us. Troy, you have any parting words as we close it down?
Yeah, I just want there's one bonus for them attending today. They can use promo code GOBIG, GOBIG with no space, and that will allow them 10% off of their first purchase. Yeah, and just thanks so much everyone for attending. And yeah, we've been doing this 14 years, probably longer than anyone else, and we've constantly been engaging in best practices throughout the years and letting our clients, doing our best to tell them what the best practices are, so that we all have the best chance of success. And we've helped thousands of agents over the years, and I think the future looks very bright. We've got some really exciting stuff in the works, and I think we'll have more leads of more lead types that are better validated in the coming, on an ongoing basis. And we really thank all the agents out there so much for.
Excellent. So just to reiterate, again, we want to close down right on time. Not to cut you off, Troy, but I want to get all these people out of here right on time. The promo code is GOBIG, which I just put in the dialog box, GOBIG, for 10% off of your order at ageleadstore.com. And again, look for your email tomorrow. We'll tell you about upcoming webinars and get all of the recording and follow-up material. So thanks for all of your attendance. Thanks, Troy, for being with us today. And we're going to sign off. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks.